Good afternoon. Maybe if I say that every 3 or 4 minutes in this hour, you'll stay awake until the end. But then again, maybe not. Listen, I tell people all the time, I don't really see anything or hear anything when I'm up here unless it's my kids. So if you fall asleep, you don't have to apologize to me. I won't even know. It will not matter. Now, you might want to apologize to John when you meet him in heaven, because this is one of the greatest chapters in his book. Maybe deserves a better time slot. I don't, but maybe John 13 deserves a better time slot than 3:30 on Saturday afternoon when we're all extremely tired. Thank you to this great congregation for all of your work. I know that many of you are not even in this room today because you're still busy around the building doing other things. I know firsthand what it takes from a congregational perspective to do something like this. And so I know that you are to be commended. And I love and appreciate you for your work's sake, and pray that my family and I will be able in some capacity and somewhere down the road to be associated with you again in the future. It happened in 2012 in the college football season, something that had never happened before in the history of the sport. That is, a freshman won the Heisman Trophy. In fact, he threw in his 2-year career at Texas A&M for almost 8,000 yards, ran for over 2,000 more, was responsible for 47 touchdowns in his freshman year alone. I know it's been a few years now, but even casual football fans in the early 20-teens knew his name and watched his antics both on and off the field. In fact, his pro career did not turn out so well, but I, for one, whose team played in the same conference as Johnny Manziel, was thankful to see him go and graduate early. I'm not here today to defend him or to praise him or to put him down. But I will say that nickname really didn't set well with me. Do you remember what it was? Johnny Football. Of all people in the history of the sport, to have the actual term of the sport connected to the name as if he represented all of its history, it was Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football, of all people. I thought it disrespectful to the sport a little bit and unnecessary. Maybe it led to his inflated ego and his antics because he was pictured in such a way. Now, I say that as a crude example of what I'm about to say now. You ever felt that way about John's nickname? The disciple whom Jesus loved? I'm not suggesting that his antics are known for their negativity or his decision-making to be as poor as a college football player who later admitted that he played a lot of games either high or drunk. But that nickname, of all people in Scripture, of all individuals on the page of the New Testament, why does John get that nickname? Now, I know that Brother Dan talked about this last night, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but it's very fundamental to our text and our thoughts from John chapter 13 today that he would be the one. You know, the suggestion might be that Jesus had a closer relationship with John than the rest. And that's very likely. He was part of that inner circle, part of the 3 that Jesus had pulled aside. He was one who Jesus would use as an example to Peter to tell Peter, mind your own business, I'll do what I want to do. And if I want to let John live forever, I'll let John live forever. None of your business. But I also have to come to terms and to grips with the fact that there may be something more to that name than simply a close familial or friendship relationship to this man. And I'll suggest this by way of introduction to our chapter for this hour. I believe John just got it. I believe he just understood it. And maybe it took other people longer to get there, or maybe because John wrote later as a more seasoned and mature preacher, that he finally was able to mature to the point where as he looked back, he could see the true place and purpose of love in the heart and mind and daily disposition of a Christian. I know as a gospel preacher, certainly have not by any means arrived, and hopefully have a lot of years left to do what I do, but I can promise you that I didn't understand the power and the depth and the place of love and ministry 20 years ago. I didn't. I understood what it meant to write a sermon, understood what it meant to preach the gospel, understood what it meant to minister to people, and sometimes to be able to have to tell it like it is, right? But there are things that as you get older, maybe as those grandkids come along, that you begin to see the qualities and concepts of Christianity in a totally different manner and light. So as John writes, as the aged, not only in this book, but in the letters that bear his name as well, love becomes a central theme. He didn't just get it, friends. He shared it. He encouraged it. And in one of those places where he encouraged it the most is in our chapter in John chapter 13. We will not take the time today to look at every aspect of this chapter in depth. I believe the focus of it is found right in the heart. Verses 34 and 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. I want to consider our lesson in 4 parts today, this afternoon. The first thing I want us to consider is the intimacy of the moment, this statement. You know, we can become very callous in our reading of biblical literature, particularly of New Testament text. And we can read the Gospels like we might read the letters, or we can read the letters like we might read the book of Acts. And even in the Gospels themselves, we might read the narrative parts different or the same as we read the parables, and the parables the same as the discussions, when in reality, different literary genres require a different approach to take. The setting, and we would say the context, is fundamental to understanding the setting and the mood and the tone and the tenor of the conversations that are had. This statement that Jesus makes in John 13 is not made on the side of a mountain in front of crowds of thousands. It's not made on the steps of the temple in Jerusalem or on the Sea of Galilee. It's not made as he stands with one foot in pagan land and one foot in Jewish land like he did in Matthew chapter 16. No, this is made in a very intimate and private discussion with his disciples. In fact, John chapters 13 through 17 are some of the most intimate portions of all of the New Testament. It's interesting, I was also assigned John chapter 5, and we considered that chapter yesterday. That chapter kicked off a new section or phase in the Gospel of John, the feast cycles, beginning with Sabbath and Passover and moving then to tabernacles and dedication all the way through chapter 10 and the various imagery fulfillment that Jesus made in those. Well, our text today also introduces a new section of the Gospel. Jesus has moved from his public ministry, chapters 1 through 12, into his private ministry, chapters 13 through the end of the book. And 13 through 17 is an in-depth look at that conversation or those conversations and prayers of Jesus in the upper room with his disciples on the night before his betrayal. Now again, John, being more seasoned and more mature and older as he writes and pens these things, looks differently at the life of Christ than the synoptic writers do. All they give us generically or in general is the institution of the Lord's Supper, the betrayal of Judas, the song and the hymn, and they go out, and the upper room scene is over. When John writes, he bears down, he digs deep. He reveals in intimate details the private conversation that Jesus had on these occasions. Now, we're so familiar with John, particularly John 13, John 14, I guess even all the way through 17, that we sometimes feel like we were there, don't we? Can't you see and envision Jesus getting up from the table where he's reclined and taking off his outer garment and picking up the towel and filling the basin with water and washing his disciples' feet? We visualize that as if we were there, as if we saw it. Or maybe these statements like, love one another as I have loved you, a new commandment I give to you, or the betrayal of Jesus, the tense moment when Judas' hand enters the dish with Jesus' hand and all eyes light up in the room and Judas goes out. We've seen that. We've studied it so much we feel like we were there. Maybe we feel like other people were there. But friends, this was as private a moment in the life of Jesus as there ever was. And because of that, if we don't appreciate it, I think we miss the power of the conversation that takes place. In John 13, beginning in John 13, Jesus changes his terms for the way that he talks about the people. In John 13 and verse 1, he calls them his own. You know, when we read that before, we read that all the way back in chapter 1 when the Bible says that he came unto his own, and his own received him not. Now his own are no longer defined as physical family members, are no longer defined as national Jews. Now his own are these 12. These private moments with his disciples, he also calls them children in verse 33. A tender and affectionate term. He calls them friends over in chapter 15. He calls them, as he prays to the Father in chapter 17, the ones you gave me, and those who are mine, verses 6 and 20. He calls them brethren in chapter 20. This is a private, intimate, tender moment between Jesus and what began as the 12 and then became the 11. You see, I believe that really chapters 1 through 11, and we've talked about 11 and 12 in the last 2 hours in here, but I think chapter 11 is the end of that public ministry, and then chapter 12 is that bridge chapter. And I think that you see in chapter 12 the two extremes and the reactions to Jesus. You see Judas being fit to be tied, that this money is being spent on Jesus and not being put in the bag. And you have Mary anointing him. You have the two extremes, and those are the extremes of all men's reactions to Jesus. You either love him or hate him. Now he's given his public ministry. He's given you all 7 signs to show that he is powerful over nature and over disease and over death and over the grave. So now you have to make a choice. Mary makes hers, Judas makes hers, and then the earthly public ministry of Jesus is done. Door is shut. But he's not through. Because behind that closed door, he then begins to work privately with his disciples, to train them and to mature them and to get them ready for the next step, the next phase, because he's about to leave. He even tells them that. Haven't we envisioned what that would have been like in chapter 14 when they're worried and fretting about him leaving, and he almost puts a hand on their shoulder and says, listen, don't be afraid, don't worry, don't let your heart be troubled. I'm not going to leave you alone. In fact, I'm going to leave the Spirit with you, and when I come back, I'm going to take you to be home with me, and everything's going to be okay. He didn't say that to the world outside. He said that in the intimate moments of that upper room, as he quelled the fears and stilled the hearts of his disciples. Let's take a quick journey through the chapter as we think about the intimacy and see how we get from where we started to where we end up, and where this call to love comes from. You see, as the chapter opens in verses 1 through 4, the scene is set. The feast of the Passover is near, and an interesting change takes place. He now knows that his hour has come. That is not what he has said in the 12 chapters previously. Starting all the way back in the wedding at Cana, when he tells his mother, it's not yet my time. My hour is not yet come. My hour is not yet come. My hour is not yet come. However, once he's finished proving his deity, once he's finished proving his power, and the last sign has been done, it's now time. You ever anticipated something in a negative or dreadful way in life, and you were able to calm your own fears by saying it's not time yet? Early on in my preaching, I would do that in a moment like this. Now, I like to get my lessons over with so I can concentrate and listen. But earlier in a setting like this, when I was younger, I would dread the 3:30 hour, whatever my hour was to preach. And I could just say, I can listen to 2 more lessons before I have to get up. I can listen to 2 more preachers before I have to preach. Maybe the roof will cave in and the skies will open up and I won't have to get up and preach. But I anticipated it's coming and I know it's there, but now is the hour. I would think that there is somewhat in the human heart and psyche of Jesus that has felt that way throughout this gospel. It's not yet time, it's not yet time, it's not yet time. Almost with a sort of relief. Because when he realizes it's time, you remember what he ends up doing, right? It goes into the garden and begs his father for some other way than the way that it's time for now. This is a change. This is a shift. It is now time. And so while Jesus is stilling the hearts and fears of his own disciples in these chapters, we know from reading the synoptics, they're developing in his own heart. And so there is that backdrop as this opening section reveals itself. And then it becomes about Peter and Jesus. And I want you to see this kind of flow and tension throughout chapter 13. And in verses 5 through 17, it becomes about Jesus and Peter. Although there are 12 in the room, Jesus begins to wash their feet, and it's Peter who says what? Not me. You'll never wash my feet, Lord. And he has to then teach Peter about the necessity not only of being clean, but about submitting to Jesus. And finally, when he makes his point, Peter said, listen, you can wash all of me. I'm fine with it. And there's that intimate moment. So it's Peter and it's Jesus, but it's in that exchange that Jesus makes this sort of offhanded comment, not all of you are clean. I think it's a direct reference to Judas. And so then the next section of this chapter, verses 18 through 30, is all about Jesus and Judas. Beginning with the prophecy of the Old Testament being brought into the New Testament, that my own familiar friend will betray me. In fact, Jesus begins to talk about it. It's interesting to me that in this private, intimate moment, that the rivalry between Peter and John rears its head again. Peter wants to know, who is it? And he asks out loud in classic Peter fashion, who is it that's going to betray you? And John, leaning on Jesus, said, who is it that's going to betray you? And both are representative of a close and personal relationship with Jesus, just the personalities of the men are different. And then Jesus said, it'll be the one with whom I dip my hand in the cup with, the dish with. And it becomes Judas that's known. Then Judas leaves. And so this intimate moment between Jesus and Peter, and then between Jesus and Judas, turns in now not to 12, but 11 that are sitting there. And now, when all the room is clear, when everyone is clean, and I think that's a reference back to what's going on earlier in the chapter, now that everyone here is clean, that is, everyone here is on board, everyone's about this mission, I've got some things I need to talk to you about. You know, we have 4 daughters, and when the older 2 got a little older and the younger 2 were still younger, there would be nights that we would put the younger 2 in bed and we would stay up late into the night talking to the older 2 girls. Yeah, I've told this before, but our girls, particularly our oldest 2, but our girls have a knack for long into the night conversations with mom and dad, and I love it. In fact, our 3rd daughter will be married in just a few weeks with 1 left at home, and I am desperately going to miss those conversations. Our 2nd daughter would come in after working, closing at Chick-fil-A, and we would be in the bed, and sometimes be in the bed to try to avoid the late night conversation. And so we would be in the bed, and there would be a knock on the door. Can I come in? And Ashlyn would sit on the end of the bed, and she would talk until 12:30 or 1 o'clock. Sometimes I would be in and out of consciousness as she was doing, kind of like you are this afternoon. But we would say about those conversations, now that it's just us, let's talk. I would use that phrase a lot when I was preaching at the university congregation in San Marcos for 15 years. They're family to me. I'm not a Texan by birth, and if you're not a Texan by birth, you can't actually be a Texan. I don't know if you knew that or not, but they will quickly let you know that. But they adopted me. My wife is a Texan, so I guess I got married into the state. But I have a deep and abiding connection with that congregation still to this day. And there would be times that we'd have to talk about things we weren't getting right, things we weren't always accomplishing like we should have been. And I would a lot of times say in those sermons, listen, it's just us today. So let's talk. Let's get to the heart of what's going on, and let's fix it together, and let's serve God greater at the end of this. Let's just fix it. That's Jesus and his disciples here in this intimate moment. Judas is gone. The world's been locked outside. It's just us. So let's talk. That's the intimacy of the moment. That's how you get from the crowds to the house in Bethany in chapter 12, to the 12, now to the 11, and then it goes as narrow as that in this text. And so as the scene shifts then from Jesus and Judas back to Jesus and the 12, or the 11, and I'll just give you this, at the end it comes back to Jesus and Peter again. And then the story's over. But it's in that moment, that intimate moment of the 11, that we come to the next section of our thoughts today. And we've seen the intimacy of the moment. Now let's look for a moment at the supremacy of love. Because that's what's taking place here. The supremacy of love. He says to them in very edge of your seat fashion, now that I've got you here, right? Now that it's just us, now that everyone else is outside, Judas is gone, we're all clean and we're all on the same page, I have a new commandment I want to give to you. I want you to think for a moment before he finishes that statement how they would have felt. The teaching of Jesus defined their lives at this point. He said, I'll make you fishers of men. And he took 3.5 years to train them, and he taught them about kingdoms and about fields and about talents. And he taught them about how to sacrifice themselves and put others first and let their light so shine. He taught them in public conversations, in private conversations. And now he's talked about leaving. Someone's going to betray him. The end is intimate. His time is at hand. And he says, I've got something brand new I want to tell you about. I would have been on the edge of my seat, right? A new commandment from Jesus? And this was it. Love one another. Do you think they felt cheated? We've heard that before, Jesus. In fact, we knew that before you came along, right? I mean, we were raised up in families that taught us the Shema, that taught us to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to do so when we were sitting up and we were lying down, when we were in the house and we were out of the house. How is this commandment new? Well, I think we should spend some time answering that. We can't spend a lot, but I think we should spend some time answering that. It was new in John 13, John 15, and John 17, and we're going to link those passages together in a moment. It was new both in illustration and in application. It wasn't new by way of wording, okay? It was new by way of example. Notice he didn't just say love one another. He added this qualifier to it, as I have loved you. I can promise you, these 11 men had never been loved like Jesus was about to love them. Not by their parents, not by their rabbis, not by their spouses, not by their children. The love that Jesus was going to show to them was going to be different. It was going to be unique. Isn't it interesting how quickly love rises to the top of the list in the New Testament of whatever list it's on? I would encourage you at some point in time to do a study. I'll just give you a few references. If you want to turn there, you can. We'll have to do this kind of quickly. Think about Colossians chapter 2 for just a moment, or Colossians 3 rather. So you have the Colossians 3 opening with the fact that we are to set our affections and our energies and our eyes on things above and not on things of the earth. And then Paul begins to describe what that looks like, and it really looks like putting to death the things of the flesh, putting to death the lust that we have. And then he says, now, when you've done all of that, as the chosen of God, holy and beloved, verse 12, now put on something. Don't stay spiritually naked. Don't just put off the old clothes. You need to put on some new ones, and here they are. Put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, forbearance, forgiveness. And whoever has a complaint against another, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Beyond or above all these things, verse 14, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. Did Paul mean that love was more important than all of these other things? Yes, that's what he meant. Not that you could love and not do these things, but if you loved, you would do these things. You know, you could forbear someone in irritation. You could show kindness to someone out of aggravation. But you can do all of these things by one simple step in life, to love them. And you'll do it all. And that rises to the list, the top of every list. The one that is most powerful to me is when Paul writes his letter to Philemon about forgiving Onesimus. You read verses 8 through 10 of that one chapter letter, and you're going to notice that Paul says, listen, I'm writing to you so that you'll take Onesimus back. And I want you to count him as a partner. I want you to count him like you would me. But Paul says in verses 8 through 10, just an interesting thing. He says, I could command you to do it. As an apostle of Jesus Christ, I have that authority. But Paul says, rather, I appeal to you for love's sake. Love is the greatest motivation to do anything we do on this earth. And even when Paul had at his disposal a bigger hammer to swing, he didn't use it. He said, love. You can't forget the conversation that Jesus had in Matthew 22, right, with the scribe who said, what's the greatest commandment of the law? And Jesus said, I'll give you two of them. Guess what they both were? They were both about love. Because love always rises to the top. And then the most famous statement, I suppose, in the New Testament about love, but now abides faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. This is the new commandment I give to you. Why? Because what's done out of love is done right. What's done out of love is done for the right reason, and I will keep doing it. What's done out of love will be done because I want to do it, not because I have to do it. The supremacy of love is highlighted in this text. But then let's think for a moment, number 3, about the illustration of this mandate. As I have loved you. I firmly believe that phrase is the key to this entire conversation. As I have loved you. And what we like to do when we think about love is we like to qualify love, we like to define love, we like to put parameters on love, and initially, especially in the church, if we're talking a lot about love, we've got to make sure that we include that sometimes love means telling people what they need to hear, even when they don't need to hear it, and all that's true. But that's not what Jesus does here. That's not the point of this passage. He loved them not by the sermons that he preached, although he did. That's not what he's talking about. He loves them by an action that he's already taken and an action that he will take later. The example of love that Jesus first refers to is the feet washing. As I have done to you, so do you to others. As I have taken the form of a servant and served you, serve others. That's love. In fact, the love of Jesus in washing their feet meant that Jesus would love no matter what. He would love even if it meant washing feet. He would love no matter who, even if it meant washing Judas's feet. And he would love no matter when, even if it meant on the night before he was going to be betrayed and crucified. That whenever love needed to be practiced, it didn't matter who, it didn't matter when, and it didn't matter what the action was. Love was what Jesus was going to do. And so as you go forth in your ministry, he would say, I need you to love like that. Does that describe the love that we have for our world and the way we carry ourselves from day to day? Do we love no matter who, no matter what, and no matter when? Or do we love when it's convenient for people who love us and think like us and look like us and treat us well? That's the love that Jesus wants them to have. As I have loved you. They weren't even loving each other at this point, and still infighting about who would be the greatest and who would take over and who would live longer, right? But you need to get there. You need to love no matter who, no matter what, no matter when. But I think that phrase, as I have loved you, is also prophetic in a way, foreshadowing what he's going to do for them. I told you there are 3 passages in this latter section of John that I think are linked. Turn over to John chapter 15 for just a moment. John chapter 15. Jesus is going to give this command again, but this time he's going to give it in respect to another example. He's going to say in chapter 15, beginning in verse 12, this is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Now, I believe in chapter 13 it's about feet washing. And so if you don't keep reading past verse 12 of chapter 15, it might also be about feet washing. But notice what he says. Greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from the Father I have made known to you. This commandment to love one another starts in the area of feet washing. It turns into the area of sacrifice, and it moves the disciples from being students of Jesus to being friends of Jesus. Because that's what love will do. Think about the people that you love the most in life that aren't blood related. How did that relationship start? Did it start with the deep, abiding love that you have for them right now? Or did it develop over time? Maybe it developed in a classroom or a church building or a dinner table. And at first you were friends and acquaintances. Maybe you were in-laws or fellow church members or next door neighbors or co-workers. And maybe you would sacrifice and do certain things, but you wouldn't die for that person. But as your love grew, as your love grew, you would. Listen, there are folks I would die for that have no blood relation to me. I'm convinced of that. It's not because I'm great, it's because the love of God is so powerful. As I have loved you, and in essence, as I will love you, so you love one another. I want you to see the connection between these two as I have loved you statements and illustrations. One is about feet washing, and one is about his death on the cross, for giving his life for his friends. I don't know, I think it was Cliff who said the other day, you only claim originality once you forget where you heard something the first time. I don't remember where I heard this the first time, and I can't even remember all the details of it, so I put my own list together. But if you look at what Jesus is doing in the feet washing, and then you look at the description, particularly let's say of Jesus in Philippians chapter 2, you can see a parallel. You go back to chapter 13 where our text is, it's going to say that Jesus rose up from supper. That is, he left where he was. Isn't that what he did when he left heaven? He rose up from the banquet table of the divine host in heaven, and then he put off his outer garment. That is, he divested himself of his majesty and his glory. He took upon him the form of a servant. That is, he picked up the towel. He poured out the water and washed their feet as Jesus poured out his life to wash us. And then he sat back down and put back on his coat as Jesus did when he ascended back to the Father. I'm supposed to see an illustration there. I'm supposed to see a connection. As I have loved you starts in an upper room with a basin of water, and it ends at the cross of Calvary when Jesus poured out not water but blood for our forgiveness, to redeem us and to buy us back and to save us. Now, I believe that all of this is placed strategically, this illustration, this phrase, this chapter in the Gospel of John. Remember, John's thesis statement is, he wrote so that we might believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and have life through that belief. And then we point out that he did 7 signs, right, to show his power over various elements of nature and even the world of the unknown and the grave. But I'm going to suggest to you that you can add an 8th sign to the Gospel of John, and it's not a miracle, it's a sacrifice. Jesus said, you want me to show you that I'm God? I will love like God loves. It's the 8th sign. You want me to show you that I'm from the Father, that I've come down to give you life, that I represent him, that I embody him, that I am him? I will love you like he loves. And then I'll ask you to do the same thing. Our third passage that links together. Look at John 17 for just a moment. This is now in this high priestly prayer of Jesus. Notice how he ends the prayer. We talk a lot about the prayer of Jesus in John 17 being about unity, and I don't want to step on the toes of the one who's going to do this later, so I just want to direct your attention to the end of it, and notice what he says, verse 24. Father, I desire that they also whom you have given me be with me where I am, so that they may see my glory which you have given me. For you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, although the world has not known you, yet I have known you, and these have known that you sent me. And I have made your name known to them. I will make it known, so that they may love that love with which you loved me may be in them, and I in them. From students to friends to partners. That's what love does as I partner with Jesus, as I walk with him. I'm his student and I learn from him. I'm his friend, I sit beside him, and then I partake with him. The love moves me from that. As I have loved you, so love one another, because you're going to be what the world sees about God when I'm gone. I need the world to see your glory. I need the world to see your majesty. I need you to show love in them the way that you've shown it in me. I need them to be in us together. So what does the love of God look like? Oh, we don't have time in 5 minutes. But the love of God is unconditional. When did you start loving your children? It's probably before they were ever born. and maybe in concept even before they were ever conceived. Right? What have your children done to make you love them more? The only thing my children have ever done to make me love them more than I used to is they gave me grandkids. And that upped the ante a little bit. But the truth of the matter is that before they could talk to me, I loved them with every fiber of my being. Before they could follow my commands or clean their room, before they could articulate a sentence and express their love for me, I already loved them. Friends, that's the love of God. And that ought to be the way we love the world around us. My neighbor doesn't have to do anything to deserve my love. He already deserves it because I'm made in God's image, and God has loved me through Jesus. And so I love unconditionally. God's love is also overarching. It is, the command that qualifies and encapsulates every other command. It's active, it's individual, it's sacrificial. And why this? In this letter, why this command? In fact, if you had time, you go read the letters of John. I'm privileged at Bear Valley to teach the letters of John. Not yet to teach the Gospel of John, but one of these days, I hope to. But I teach the letters of John first quarter each year. And I'm amazed at John's logical or sometimes seemingly illogical move through the book as it spins in circles and doesn't go in a linear fashion like a lot of Paul's writings do. But he'll say this. He'll say, keep the commandments of God in chapter 2. Keep the commandment of God. And then he won't tell me what that is. I'm giving some context clues on the way. It's not until chapter 3 that he says, this is the commandment. Believe in Jesus and love one another. We make things very, very complicated, don't we? John said, here's the answer to it all. Trust in the deity of Jesus and show love like he showed to you. That message harkens right back to this intimate moment in John chapter 13. Believe I'm he, and because of that, love one another. That is the commandment, right? That is the teaching. That is what you're to do. But why is this so important for John's writings? Well, in the couple of minutes we have left, I just want to say this. And I haven't really, I thought we would hear a lot about that, and I did. That's not a good thing. I just thought we would. I thought we'd hear a lot about this weekend, and maybe I just haven't been in the right lectures, but the growing, building heresy in the first century that led John to write what he wrote. I don't know how quickly Gnosticism came on the scene. Probably not as quickly as sometimes we make it out to be in our introduction of John. It probably didn't come to the fullness until the 2nd century. But the idea of Gnosticism, well, to define it would be like nailing Jell-O to the wall, and I can't do that, so I'll just give you one tenet of it. At the core of it, it said that you can't be close to a perfect and holy God. You can't. They had all of these fanciful explanations for how humanity got into the world and how he's so separated from the pleroma, the fullness, the ultimate creator, or actually the ultimate good. It couldn't have been the creator because ultimate good couldn't create flesh. I know it's convoluted and ridiculous, but that's their teaching. But at the end of the day, what it teaches is that in your flesh, living on this earth, experiencing life, you can never have an actual relationship with the fullness of goodness that God is. But what they believe is that the Old Testament God is really a demigod, severely removed, and Jesus was a rogue God who created the world, and you can't have any connection to them or to the true God through them. And John says, I'll draw you a straight line from the goodness and greatness of God to his humanity, and that straight line is love. When you love, you're like God. When you love, you belong to him. When you love, that's who you're identified with. There's no other connection. There's no other solution. There's no other option. If you love, you are of him. So when the world says you can't know God and you can't relate to him and he won't forgive you and you don't have a connection and the world's too evil, and they're saying the same things today. You know what I can say? I can know him. Because I can look down the pew and I can see my brother or my sister who loves me unconditionally and actively and overarchingly who forgives me and embraces me and gives me the benefit of the doubt. I can see my family do the same thing. Thanks be to God. Not for just a conversation 2,000 years ago with 11 men in an upper room, but for a standard of love that if I live it today, can show God to the world and allow God to live through me.